Great. So I just want to welcome our panelists and everybody in the audience. Thank you for being this afternoon here with us in our second seminar of the Future of Longevity series. We are very honored to host some of the brightest minds working on reversing aging and accelerating lifespans. During this discussion, we will learn about how they're approaching longevity, and we're going to learn more from the scientists, innovators, and investors themselves. We're going to do some quick intros and then introduce our panelists, as well as reiterate the house rules for the discussion. I'm going to start with myself. My name is Laura Minquini, and I'm the founder of My Ikigai, a vetted, curated platform promoting longevity as a lifestyle experience. Having spent my early career in trend forecasting and branding and design, I see the potential of longevity becoming the next big direct to consumer category, empowering people to practice preventative health. I'm always looking for new companies going direct to consumer, and my DMs are always open. And I'm very happy to be here with two of my friends and experts in the longevity space, Avi Roy and Nathan Cheng. I'll let them introduce themselves.
Thank you, Laura, and hello, everyone. My name is Avi. I'm a biomedical scientist and entrepreneur based in Oxford. I advise and fund startups in health and longevity space in North America, EU, and India. I also work with governments to define and develop policies that will enable the longevity infrastructure. Besides the always enthusiastic Laura, I'm also joined by the erudite and very entrepreneurial Nathan as the moderator for this panel. Nathan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Avi. My name is Nathan Cheng. I'm the founder of the Longevity Market Cap newsletter and also a website called Longevity List, where you can find jobs, companies, and investors in longevity biotech. But more importantly, I'm also the program director of the On Deck Longevity Biotech Fellowship. It's basically a program where people who want to, come build companies or join startups in the longevity biotech space, we just get them all together in this really cool community, and some of the members of which are here on this panel. And we're just gathering people who want to do something about aging and create amazing companies. If you're interested in doing something about aging, definitely apply to our program if you're interested. The website is beyonddeck.com. You can find us there. Yeah, I guess I'll hand it back to Laura.
Thanks, Nathan. So I'm going to do a quick introduction of each one of our guests, starting from left to right in order from top to bottom. I'll start with Jay Olshansky. He is currently a professor in the School of Public Health at the University of Illinois and Chicago, research associate at the Center on Aging at the University of Chicago, and co-founder of chief scientist at Lapidus Solutions. Next is Nir Barcelai. Nir is the director of the Institute for Aging and Research at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine and the director of the Paul F. Glenn Center for the Biology of Human Aging Research and the National Institute of Health's Nathan Schock Centers of Excellence in the Basic Biology of Aging. Next, Alejandro Campo. Alejandro is assistant professor of the University of Lausanne. His research areas include epigenetics, stem cells, aging, and mitochondrial diseases, with the goal of clarifying diseases mechanism and developing novel therapeutic approaches to improve the quality of life of patients. Next is Kristen Fortney. Kristen is the CEO and co-founder of BioAge, a clinical stage biotechnology company on a mission to develop a broad pipeline of the therapies that target aging in order to increase health span and address chronic diseases. George Church is the Robert Winthrop Professor of Genetics at the Harvard Medical School, Professor of Health Sciences and Technology at Harvard and MIT, and founding member of the Wyss Institute for Biological Inspired Engineering. And Jim Mellon is here on stage with us now. He is the co-founder and chairman of Juvenescence, a company which aims to develop science-backed therapies that extend both health span and lifespan. Jim has established the Mellon Longevity Center at Oxford. Welcome to all our panelists again, and thank you for being here.
Yeah, so just a quick note. So this will be a FYI, or actually not an FYI, but this will be a rapid fire lightning round so that everybody can, chime in. And the question is really simple. How do you plan to reverse aging in your own ways? And this is a question for each one. And maybe we can go ladies first. Kristen, if you want to start it off, how do you, your efforts, your company, how do you guys plan to reverse?
Yeah, for sure. So I'll dive right into that. So at BioAge, we think that really the low-hanging fruit in aging is to copy what already works. There already are a lot of people who live to be 100 plus in great cognitive health and great physical health. What's different about those people at the molecular level that we can target with a drug? And so our whole approach at BioAge is to really follow large cohorts of people throughout their aging, because humans do age on the scale of decades from 50 to 100, and then map out using modern omics technologies and systems biology and AI all the different pathways that predispose to exceptional longevity, and then target those with therapies. And that's true for the first 3 clinical bets we've made, as well as for additional ones we'll make over time.
Amazing. Anyone can take the next answer. So Nir, George, Jim, Alejandro.
Sure, I'll strengthen Kristen approach because I'm doing centenarians studies. Centenarians have longevity genes. We're doing an effort with Regeneron, a pharmaceutical, to get 10,000 more centenarians in order to find all the longevity genes. That your longevity genes, there's no one public longevity genes. They actually have several ways of getting to 100. But I think this is crucial for at least phase 1 to start making improvement now. Of course, the centenarians still have a limited capacity. They won't live beyond 115 years, but at least we can make progress now. I also want to say in my introduction, I'm also a founder of a company called Cobar, and it's a public company. And what we have is the genome of the mitochondria. You all know about the genome of our nucleus, but the mitochondria has genome. And we discovered that the mitochondria produce lots of proteins that have role in resiliency in aging, and we're developing them into treatment. So this is just an example of another biotech that takes a certain approach and targets aging.
Jim, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I'll just say that obviously I'm overwhelmed by the potency and capability of the scientists on this call, which I'm not, but our background is, the background of the founders is in drug development, and we are taking the view that we're not sure what's going to work, and I don't think anyone really is sure what's going to work, but we know something is going to work. And so we've got 20 projects, which is contrary, I think, to what most companies are doing. We're sniping our way towards success, we hope, at least. But I absolutely agree with Kristen and Nir. I think they were saying this, that alteration of the genes is going to be the factor that causes someone to live to 150. All the other stuff is probably going to be incremental. It won't be revolutionary, but gene therapy ultimately will be the thing that will allow some people on this call to live to 150 and beyond.
Thank you. George, please go.
Just Nir agrees with Kirsten about centenarians. I agree with Jim about gene therapy. I think it is a great way of getting specific delivery to either systemically or to very specific parts of the body. It allows you to go directly from molecular biology hypothesis to a therapy without doing a lot of stumbling around for drugs that are sufficiently specific. So we've published a couple of combination gene therapies, each involving 3 different genes. One set was completely cell non-autonomous, meaning it would spread out from the cells that was in, and that was FGF21 and a soluble TGF-beta receptor and alpha-klotho. And then we did another one with David Sinclair's lab, working on the classic Yamanaka factors, OX4, SOX2, and KLF4. But the key thing is that these have been shown in a variety of ways to actually do aging reversal. So it's not particularly speculative nor particularly far off in the future. I mean, it really is a matter of just getting through the clinical trials, which we've done mouse and dog, and we're looking forward to doing human now.
Thank you, George. Alejandro?
Yeah. Thank you. First of all, thank you for inviting me. This is an amazing panel and I'm super pleased to be part of it. Just to switch a little in a different direction, for us, we strongly believe that aging is an epigenetic state. We believe that aging is actually a reversible epigenetic state, and therefore we think that the dysregulation of the epigenome that occurs as we age is probably one of the strongest drivers. So for us, in order to target this, we are trying to develop, what I think my name is maybe known for, reprogramming. So we are trying to develop therapies based on epigenetic reprogramming. So try to reverse all epigenome back to a younger state. So this is a little the approach that we are taking. I would like even to add that, as George just mentioned, it's true that Yamanaka factors have the capacity to do this, but at the end, these are genes that are already present in our genome. It's just that they are epigenetically silent. So for us, even epigenetic reprogramming of Yamanaka factors endogenous could be already a way. But yes, so we strongly think that the epigenome is a main driver, and that manipulating the epigenome and reprogramming back to a younger state could reverse aging.
Thank you, Alejandro. And last but not least, Jay.
Sure. Thanks for inviting me. Yeah, my focus is on the logic and the rationale behind why all of these research scientists are working in an area that requires funding and exploring the value of this work for public health and for health span extension. I'm a little curious about the language about age reversal because I've heard it used several times here, and I think the public may get the impression that we're going to make us into younger versions of ourselves. I'm 67. If my friends here are suggesting you're going to turn me into a 20-year-old version of myself, I would most welcome it, of course, but I don't think that's really what we're talking about. So I would just urge caution about how we present this to the public, and also in terms of lifespan itself, talking about 150-year-old people when the maximum lifespan we've observed is 122. Even if we had a therapeutic intervention that could make us live to 150, we wouldn't know that it worked for at least 30 to 40 years. So I just want us to stick to science.
Thank you, Jay. It's very interesting to have the public policy side of things here, and that we're very glad that you were able to make it. Nathan, going back to the science, your question.
Yeah, I think what Jay mentioned is a good segue, right? So when we're developing therapies that modulate aging, perhaps slow it down or whatever, I guess we should ask the panelists, how do we know that these therapies that are being developed in scientific labs or being brought to clinical trials are actually have an effect on aging? Maybe we can start with Nir.
Yeah, sure. Look, the fact that Jay is 68 years old has to do a lot with the fact that at one point we built sewers and we cleaned the water and we developed surgery and immunization. So we're not going to one day wake up and say, okay, this is 150 years. I think Jay alluded to other things. The major mission is, which is a huge and frustrating mission, is to get the FDA, really you need the government or the governments or the world to understand that aging is preventable. That there's a lot of data to suggest that aging has a biology that can be targeted, it can be delayed, it can be stopped, it can be reversed in certain situations, like in older people if they have enough of senescent cells, probably. And so the challenge is to do a study that will open the gates so that pharmaceuticals will have help the biotech, and there'll be lots of studies out there. So beside doing this study, the other thing that is missing, and it's a kind of a catch-22, is those biomarkers for aging that Kristen can talk more about. We are just shy, and I think it's going to be rapid now, but we're just shy of having those biomarkers, because after all, we don't want to do a phase 3 study with billions of dollars to fail. We need in several weeks or months to know if any tool that we have or any gerotherapeutics that we'll have will have this effect. So those are the two things on my mind most of all.
Can I amplify this, what you're talking about? So Nir is raising a critically important point here, and that is the first thing is to recognize something that a lot of folks still don't recognize, which is the simple conclusion that aging itself is inherently modifiable. That is a profound conclusion in the world of aging science and aging biology and in public health. And let me just state that we don't need to talk about adding 20, 30, 40, 50 years to life. We don't need to talk about immortality. All we need to talk about is delaying aging by 1 year. 1 year in and of itself would have a huge impact on quality of life, public health, and the economy. Just 1 year. And that's all you need to argue here. And it's now been documented in the literature what the economic value is of a single year of healthy life extension. So let's just shoot for something that's achievable and measurable.
So this is George. I agree with Jay that we just need to have an impact of a year, but sometimes it's hard you need a large cohort to show that it is a year of extension, but maybe a smaller cohort to show that you have reversal of a disease. And to Nir's point about convincing the public or the FDA about prevention, I think it's a little bit easier to show that you have reversal of a disease. I agree with Jay that we don't want to act like we're 20-year-olds or act like we're going to be 20-year-olds. But if we have reversal of disease, that fits much more into the standard logic of the FDA, but it can have with it the prevention of all the other diseases as a side effect. So rather than promising longevity or promising prevention, which is very hard to get FDA approval of treating an already healthy person, we can go with the flow and actually do reversal of a variety of diseases that have very little in common other than that they have an underlying epigenetic phenomenon that causes them to increase tremendously with age. So we're curing or reversing these diseases by a common mechanism, but all we have to do is extend someone's life by a year that has one of these many common and deadly symptoms.
Yeah, just to chime in there, I think that's a really important point that aging and disease are two sides of the same coin, right? You don't have aging without disease. And for those of us that are in the clinic working on a true aging target or a true aging drug, it will have a significant impact on really multiple different age-related diseases. And that might be the first fast clinical path that's practical. But to Nir's point as well, right? Ideally, you'd like to know in the course of your trial that not only is it just relevant to this one disease, but that you are ultimately affecting fundamental processes of aging. And to that end, I think that we all believe that biomarkers are going to be really important, something that really predict your aging state, your lifespan, your future health span. I think the field has made tremendous strides just in the last decade in terms of building really predictive markers from genomics data like the methylome, the proteome, the metabolome. And those are heavily used in research now, and I hope to see them start to be used in the clinical setting as well.
Can I add just, and being a clinician, when you're a clinician, then when you go to medical school, first thing they teach you is to do no harm, okay? So that makes you conservative immediately. And the second day they say there's no always and there's no never in medicine. So you lose confidence. And I'm saying that just because those are the people who are making these decisions, okay? So from their perspective, look what happens with a simple example of metformin, a cheap, generic, safe drug that have shown, first of all, to prevent diabetes in people who don't have diabetes. The FDA is reluctant to approve metformin for the prevention of diabetes, a study like a phase 3 trial that has occurred already. Not to talk about the fact that metformin is shown to decrease cancer, Alzheimer, cardiovascular, and mortality in clinical and association studies. So we have to think of it this way. And by the way, everything you said is true, and we have to do it in parallel. But if we really want people to focus about aging, If we want pharmaceutical to have this breath to say we're developing a pill that everybody will take, and you know what? They'll take it for decades. If we want that, we need also to do the whole thing and not only diseases, which is a way to get money in order to get to aging, in my mind, mainly.
Jim, as an investor, how does this regulation or the way thing affect investments and where the capital is allocated?
Okay, Laura, I think that the biomarkers is a very key part of this, but obviously the FDA has to be persuaded that the biomarkers are an acceptable substitute for lengthy trials, and that's going to be a big deal if that happens. I think that the biomarkers are getting ever more sophisticated. Biological clocks are getting ever more sophisticated, and they're going to be very accurate and potent, I'm sure, in 2 or 3 years' time. But we need to get the FDA and other regulatory agencies like the EMA to accept that they are good substitutes for lengthy trials, since human beings live relatively long lives. The second thing is I completely agree with Nir that metformin is obviously Nir is Mr. Metformin in the world. I completely agree that is a no-brainer in terms of its ability to do something in the field of aging. But I also think, and just to get back to my earlier point, that we're in the dial-up phase of the internet at the moment. We really don't know who the winner of the web browsers, the winner of the internet providers and all that sort of stuff is going to be, but we know that someone's going to win. Ultimately, I agree. I also agree with Jay that 1 year would be a good start, but it's really 1 year as a rounding error in terms of how long we live. Maybe we should go for 5 or 10 years as a sort of objective to begin with. And we certainly don't want to scare the horses by suggesting that everyone can live to 150 by some sort of pharmaceutical approach, because that's just not going to happen for a while. We do this thing in increments, and then suddenly the increments become big jumps.
Thanks, Jim. Alejandro, any comments before we move on to the next question about the biomarkers of aging, or any other comments that any other speaker made?
Yes, so I completely agree with most of the things that that have been said. For us, of course, if we think about the epigenome as a main driver, of course, we are very enthusiastic about DNA methylation clocks, or any other clock that can measure aging based on the epigenome. I feel the majority of the field does not agree on the value of these biomarkers. So I think maybe one of the first things we need is to agree on what biomarkers have good value to measure aging, because before that, it will be impossible to convince FDA or investors that they should really allow us to run a trial. So I think, again, methylation clocks for us are good. I think are very accurate, but I think still there is a large part of the field that does not believe they are good biomarkers. I think sometimes it's also because we confuse a biomarker with a driver. I am saying that DNA methylation is good, but I'm not necessarily saying that changes in DNA methylation drive aging. I think we can look at it and we can measure aging, but not necessarily say that these changes is what drive the process. And then in a second line, I would like to add that blood for us, I completely agree with what Kristen and the team are doing. I think blood has a lot of value. Everything you can do in the blood, from genomics to proteomics to analyze cell populations, markers of senescence. So it will have a tremendous value there. And of course, don't forget what people care, how people behave, how they perform, both functionally and also cognitive. And lastly, of course, incidence of age-related diseases. So I would like just to group all together. But I think we need first to start agreeing on good biomarkers of aging.
Thank you, Alejandro. I just wanted to quickly say that Jay will have to step off the panel, but thank you again for being here and mentioning public policy, and which is quite important. Or my next question, we've touched on public policy and regulation. So this weekend, Richard Branson went to space, and while some of us saw a great feat of science and a 70-year-old man accomplishing a lifelong dream, others saw a billionaire wasting money. Longevity also has this perception problem by the media of being deemed a fancy of billionaires. Do we think it's important to change this, and how do we do it? Or how are your organizations doing this?
Let me just say, first of all, I think scientifically it didn't go to space.
Yes, true.
but I would say that those who support this effort, and I have nothing against this effort, you should know that our mission as humanity is not to go 50 miles above If we want to go to Mars, okay, we need to solve aging first of all, okay? So this is for me the connection. But it's more than that. We're not talking only about aging, we're talking about people who survive from cancer. From cancer because they got chemicals and radiation that accelerate their aging. They're aging rapidly. They need help. People who have HIV die 10 years younger than their cohort. People who are debilitated on wheelchair, they have a very bad health span and short lifespan. It's not only about aging. There's a lot of others who need help, and I think we have to frame it differently so people don't think that this is just a life extension. This is something that's important for humanity, whether to the poor unfortunate or to those who want to go to space.
Can I follow up one thing before I leave?
Yes, please.
So just to reemphasize what Nir is saying here, this question comes up all the time, whether or not we should be spending precious resources on reducing infectious disease mortality versus going after aging. And I've heard it multiple times that this is all a waste of money, billionaires trying to extend their lives. That's not what this is all about. This is a fundamental, foundational public health effort like we saw something like this a little over 120 years ago with the foundation of public health, but with the introduction of antibiotics and vaccines. This is on the order of something like that. And what we're talking about, and I think the language we should be using involves something simple, a simple metric that is referred to as a person year of healthy life. And think of a person year of healthy life as one of the most valuable commodities that exists on Earth. And you talk to any of the billionaires, of course, and they'll trade their money in for healthy life any day of the week. And that's what we're talking about here, is manufacturing through science, through technology, the most precious commodity that may exist, which is health span extension. And you get more healthy life added with a 1 year or 2 year or 3 year slowdown in the rate of aging than you would get with a cure for cancer. Think about that for a second. The impact has a cascading effect on multiple disease endpoints, and so the benefits are quite large with small improvements in delayed aging. And I think that's the logic and the rationale we should be using in general, and it's the general response to the comment that this is just for billionaires. It's not. It's for everyone.
Thank you, Jay, and thank you for being here again. This is very important that this is one of the reasons we have these conversations, for people to understand this message. Anybody else wants to comment on this?
Yeah, this is George. Oh, Kristen, go ahead. Anyway, I was just going to say along lines, taking Jay's in a slightly different direction, is that my group is highly motivated to bring down the costs of technologies so that it is accessible to everybody. So we've brought down the cost of reading genomes by 20 million fold. The cost of some things like vaccines drops precipitously once something goes extinct, like smallpox. So aging, I see not just as not being elitist, it is possibly something that reduces costs of medicine in general, because it might have a preventative mechanism that's applicable to everyone, in which case the fixed cost of the clinical trials is amortized over a much larger denominator of individuals. So it could be the opposite of elitist if we play our cards. So I think that's an important aspect, and it's also amplifies on what Nir said, is that this is not just one disease or about longevity. It really impacts almost every form of morbidity and mortality, including things like falling down and not getting up. So it really could have a huge impact on everyone, and therefore be very inexpensive.
I think the economic arguments, as you've outlined, Jay and George, are incredibly compelling. And these therapies can ultimately help everybody. And I think it's a misunderstanding that people are not identifying increase in life extension with health span extension with freedom from disease. But even in the very near term, I think it does resonate with people that studying aging can help us even in the way that we treat conventional diseases. Because remember, like we spend a fortune every year on treating cancers and research for cancers, biotech for cancer, and for Alzheimer's disease, diseases that happen to people that are old, that are in their 80s, that are not in their 20s, but that are still studied, not usually in the context of aging. Like the mouse models for Alzheimer's disease are in these genetic backgrounds that are very unlike how it happens naturally. So I think there's a message there too that looking at disease through the lens of aging will find important new causal targets in the near term. And then ultimately, these mechanisms will also be helpful for prevention and for the population at large.
Let me also point, and you can find it, there's an Andrew Scott, who is an economist, an article that came in Nature Aging, that really look at the economy of health span from many perspectives, because it's not only the health cost, it's what those guys who are healthy doing. They are traveling, they are buying things, they're doing other things. And the bottom line is that we were underestimating those longevity dividends. If we look from GDP perspective, it can save 36.9% of GDP if in the next 10 years we'll extend health span by 2.6 years only. It's 83.6 trillions of dollars. You should look at the figures in these papers, and we have to really use it simply to explain to economists, to people in the government, that the longevity dividend here is huge, and then we can have money to do other things too.
Jim?
I'll just say, and thank you, Laura, I'll just say that there has to be a price for innovation. Some of us are involved in the pharma development business, and you have the greatest innovation in the United States. I think drug prices ab initio have to be relatively high, otherwise people won't develop drugs. That's a straightforward proposition. But the great news is that we live a long life, as I said earlier on, and the commercial exploitation period for drugs is only about 10 years. So very quickly, these drugs will be in wide dispersal across the populations in rich and poor countries alike. So I think that the initial inventors of these products have to make a profit because the rate of failure is so high and the cost of innovation is so high. But very quick, the price comes down to basically peanuts and is accessible to everyone. And I'll give you a very brief example of that in earlier times. Ulcer drugs, anti-ulcer drugs, were developed in the 1980s, and they were very expensive. Drugs like Zantac or Tagamet or Omeprazole. And today, they were really expensive drugs, and people died of ulcers. And today, you can go into Walgreens or Boots or wherever you are and buy them for almost nothing. And it will be the same with aging drugs. So this idea that it's only for billionaires, it's elitist, and all this sort of stuff is absolute nonsense, because it will be accessible to everyone within 10 or 20 years.
Thank you. Alejandro, please go ahead.
Yeah, I would like to actually remind everyone that actually when we speak about breakthroughs, I think, yes, they will happen at some point, but I think first we need to make simple things to happen. No, I think in the aging field, if we compare longevity with going to Mars, I think first we need to go to the moon, then we need to be able to fly a rocket. So I think even the early first steps have not been done. Like to me, to have even a trial for an anti-aging drug needs to happen before we have an ultimate breakthrough where we can really reverse. No? So to me, I want to be very cautious here and to say that I think the first drugs that will be out there would be drugs that you will take very frequently in a preventive way. And then ultimately, yes, at some point when we learn from all that, you will have drugs that will reverse aging. But I think we need to go step by step. It's true that now why this time is different, I feel is because the society and the world is feeling that aging is actually a real problem. In the past, it used to be you just age, is something natural and there is nothing you can do about it. So in the moment the public starts to learn that, yeah, there is something you can maybe do about it, and actually it's important, is becoming a real problem. Society, pension, retirement, is like the climate change of humanity. You know, I hear people saying sometimes. So I think, yes, the pressure that society is putting to, and the interest is clearly maybe accelerating these breakthroughs. But I think still we are in the first steps of making this happen.
Thank you. Indeed, longevity science, it is the promise for us to live longer with health, which most people would say yes if they knew they had that choice. And that's why we want to hear from you directly, all of you directly explaining this to the audience and everybody who is curious about the field. With that said, I'm just going to quickly reset the room. And we are in on the Future of Longevity panel discussing the science of longevity with some of the most prominent scientists, innovators, and investors in the field. And this, we have Nearby Salai, Alejandro Campo, Kristen Fortney, George Church, and Jim Mellon. And co-hosting with me is Nathan Cheng and Avi Roy. And we are going to move into the Q&A part very soon. We'll let you know as soon as we start that. Please remember to keep your questions short and not to make them about health recommendations. With that said, I can't remember if it's Avi or Nathan that has the next question. Please go ahead.
I'll just jump straight up. This one will be a little bit exciting, and hopefully, audience, you will benefit from this. Near Alejandro, Kristen, George, Jim, you guys all have a vision of how what the future looks like. Jim, you're an investor, so you invest on that, like what you imagine that the world is going to be 10 or 20 years from now. I know that you have given talks about that. George, you do that about technology. Near, you have been involved in clinical trials. So are you now, Kristen? And of course, Alejandro, as a scientist, you are definitely imagining what the future entails. So the question is about 2 or 3 things that you fundamentally believe is inevitable in the future of longevity, aging, and health. I'm just pointing out about the next 10 years. And also, if you could also talk about the obstacles that might prevent it from happening. So anybody who wants to start with that. So 2 or 3 things that you fundamentally believe is inevitable in the future of longevity, aging, and health, and what are some of the obstacles?
I sure can start. I want to quote Bill Gates, who said we're overestimating what we can achieve in 2 years and underestimating what we can achieve in decade. I would take it and say, if I can predict the future, I'll do it very expensively. So there are 4 scenarios. And by the way, I got those scenarios from this paper of Bruce Scott. There's the Gulliver approach, where Scarbridge lived. He got older but never died. That we don't want that. We don't want to extend lifespan without extending health span. Fortunately, we know that if we target aging, we do both. So the next possibility is to do a Dorian Gray scenario, where Dorian Gray, the mirror, when he looked at the mirror aged, but he stayed young. In other words, or stayed in the same age, I should say. So how can we stop aging in people who are already old? I think this is something that's achievable. We can start with simple drugs, like you all know, or exercise and stuff, and actually gain some years until George is doing the genetic therapy. Then there is the Peter Pan example, right, where Peter Pan doesn't age. And I think that in the future, probably we'll think about, we don't have to stop aging when it happens. We have to stop aging before it happens. And maybe a 1 monthly epigenetic clearing will be all we need to stop aging. And of course, there's the Wolverine that takes old and makes them young. I hope that we don't need to do that, but in a certain way, the senolytics are doing that. They're taking old people with a lot of senescent cells and will make them much younger, at least functionally. So I think the vision is there. We have to work on it in parallel, and we'll get it at different times.
What I believe is going to be true for human aging and true pretty soon is that we're going to discover that really a lot of different things are going to work, a lot of different mechanisms, a lot of different targets. Like, I'm pretty bullish here, and I think the field is wide open. And longevity science, I would say we're still mapping out what's the most important for human aging, but we know, for example, like all the different things that can make a worm live longer. People have done these genome-wide experiments, and The answer is that hundreds of things can make a worm live longer and healthier. And while I expect the identity of those things to be different in humans, I expect the scale to be similar. There's probably lots of different pathways you can intervene in. As you mentioned at the beginning, right? These centenarians seem to be living to 100 via different mechanisms, and probably those are going to be. And in terms of what could get in the way of us making that discovery, it's just really not trying enough things. I think that we need to really do a lot of experiments in the clinic in human populations with safe and promising mechanisms.
I can actually come in. So I actually believe in 4 things that will happen. The first 3 are actually interconnected. So I do believe that we will have drugs or therapies that will slow down or even reverse aging, that the regulatory agencies like FDA, EMA will approve aging as an indication, and that the investors will invest in developing anti-aging drugs that target aging, organismal aging. I think the 3 of them need each other. No, I think scientists need to provide those drugs and those biomarkers. Regulatory agencies, when they believe in those, they will accept and allow you trials, and investors will finally decide to invest. So I think those 3 are clearly interconnected. It's like the chicken and the egg. And then the last one I want to mention is I do believe that finally the biomedical research field will realize that modeling age-associated diseases in young mice is useless. So I do believe that people will start using aged mice in order to model diseases of.
Can I just say something, Avi? What is rather sad is that a lot of us on this call do multiple calls, and there is a small cadre of people who will listen, but the big story has not yet got out there. And as a result, only a relatively small amount of money, we think about $4.5 billion, has gone into the private sector of aging, and a very small amount of the government research budgets around the world has gone into aging, even though it's probably the most critical scientific endeavor of anyone's lifetime. I think all of us need to find a way of getting our message out to a newer audience, and also to an audience that will bring much more money into the sector. Because if there's not much more money, then we're probably in 5 years' time going to be talking about more or less the same sort of stuff. So I don't know how that's going to happen, but it's very important that it does happen. And Kristen, Near, other people, we're all joining forces to try and make that happen. But it's a difficult thing to happen. Meanwhile, cannabis attracts $100 billion of investment, psychedelics, $20 billion of investments, Richard Branson going to space, I don't know how much that costs. The wrong priorities are getting lots of money, and we are not getting enough money.
Thank you, Jim. George, any insights?
Yeah, I agree with Jim that we need to expand the audience. A couple of ways to do that is, one is to show results in a rapid way. And one way to do that is via veterinary. So a lot of people love their pets. And so one of the things we're doing at Rejuvenate Bio is aiming our first wave at dogs, because the approval process is faster, the costs are lower, and people can see with their own eyes the impact of things that have been proven already in mice. So that's one approach. The other approach is that reaches, instead of maybe 1,000 people that this particular program will reach, you can reach tens of millions with television and movies and books and magazines. So in organizations like pged.org, they have a conduit to screenwriters and other writers. So I think those are 2 things that could get a better set of priorities. I completely agree with Jim about that, and I agree with Kristen about how there are many ways to solve the problem. For example, in worms, but most of those ways are fairly small effects, and just so we might want to combine them. Combinations are not always additive. Sometimes they're antithetical, and sometimes they're synergistic, and so that will take some finesse. But I think we need to really probably have to get everything, all the pathways straight. So even though there's many routes of making a small impact, there may be a slightly more difficult, but still something that could happen in the next couple of years because of the exponential technologies we have, that we can get all the pathways right all at once. So I think that's maybe the nuanced.
Thank you, George. We at Longevity definitely need somebody like an Oprah being an enthusiast of it. And I think we would see a very big jump in enthusiasm from the general public.